Welcome to Conversations, a podcast provided by the Center for Thriving Leaders and sponsored by Grace Theological Seminary. I'm Dr. Trent Lambert, and we are here to help leaders thrive in ministry. Let's jump into the conversation for today. Welcome to Conversations. It's a podcast provided by the Center for Thriving Leaders, sponsored by Grace Theological Seminary. I'm Dr. Trent Lambert, and we are here to help leaders thrive in ministry. So let's jump right into our conversation for today. Again, I'm so glad for our listening audience. Today we're going to be talking about some issues circling around the idea of relationship and conflict. And so today we've got a special guest with us, Mark Oelze. Mark, welcome to the program.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Mark has spent the better part of his life helping people to experience peace in the relationship between both God and man. Out of his 35 years of being a marriage counselor, he discovered what is critical to having conflict, resolving conversations rather than arguments. This, in fact, is his unique offering to the world of communication training. Most books and teaching revolve around the do's and don'ts when in conflict. Don't point your finger or blame the other. Watch your tone. Don't raise your voice to get your point across, and etc. Instead, Mark trains people to use PLEDGEtalk, which is 6 sequential steps to guide the needed dialogue to find resolve. When followed, it leads to peace and greater connection. Deviate from the guide and you will derail the conversation every time. Mark is passionate, fun, and highly practical keynote or a conference speaker, a corporate trainer in the fields of communication, conflict resolution, and relational culture. In Mark's book, The Pledge of a Lifetime, Dr. Crabb wrote, "Lovingly relating in the middle of conflict and all the time is perhaps the highest value of a Jesus-revealing life." My friend Mark's book goes a long way to providing clear understanding and practical instruction of what it means to actually love. I've never read one better on the subject. Once again, Mark, welcome to Conversations today.
Thank you, Trent. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction as well.
Mark, in all of that, we've already learned some things about you, but I'll just give you a little platform here. Tell us about yourself, where you're from, the makeup of your family, maybe some things that we didn't learn from that little bio.
Sure. Well, I read this. You gave me a couple of questions ahead of time. I thought, I just wanted to tell you, I love Jesus and I love people. They are both my passion of my life. I'm grateful for having grown up in a family that also loved Jesus, and relationships was like the most important part of growing up. And it's continued to be that way in my life. I have a beautiful wife named Zarin. She and I met at Grace College and became best friends and have been best friends for 41 years now. And actually best friends were longer than that, but married 41 years. So thankful for her. She's my, not only my best friend, greatest encourager, greatest listener, just an amazing person in my life. So I'm so thankful for her. And then we have three kids of our own. They're all grown up. They're all in education. Our entire family is in education in some way or another. And then we got about 5 girls who call us mom and dad. So 5 extra girls who call us mom and dad. It's just a lot of fun.
So you have 3 girls of your own. Is that what you just said?
2 girls.
2 girls. 2 girls and a son, and then 3 more that call you mom and dad.
Yeah, actually about 5 more.
5 more.
So 2 girls and a son of our own, and then about 5 girls who call us mom and dad. 5 extras. Is my point.
That's tremendous.
We've had a lot of exchange students in our home, and just girls we picked up along the way that just love our family, and we love them. So
that's tremendous. One thing that I like to ask leaders is, certainly we talk about family, which is priority, but another aspect is, what do you and your wife like to do in your free time?
Yeah, we like to do things that just where we're connected together. We love to take walks. We love to talk. We love to go bike riding on tandem. I don't know if you've ever done any tandem bike riding.
I have.
But it's but we really enjoy that. We love kayaking or playing pickleball is one of the more recent things we enjoy doing as well.
My wife just mentioned to me that she would like to learn pickleball, so that is something else I think I'm going to learning how to do.
It's a lot of fun.
That's what I've heard.
We've had some great time. Cool.
So
Good.
So you're a Grace grad with a master's degree in biblical counseling. I know you mentioned that you met your wife here, but tell us about your experience here as Grace as a student.
I really enjoyed the 4 years spent there. Well, I'm thinking it was probably the first time that I experienced what I would say is real genuine community. There at in the dorm, Beta dorm, and just throughout the campus. I think we had a student population back then of 750 kids, and just experienced a lot of community, and that was a wonderful memory. And I still have great connection with a number of guy friends, especially from Grace, and it's been a really special part of my life.
It's so easy to take things for granted. I was recently traveling and got to visit some other colleges, universities, and we certainly can get lost within our beautiful little campus here and take things for granted. But Grace is a very special place, and God is really doing some very unique, special things here at the seminary right now that we are just all, and every day we come into work, Mark, just wondering what's going to happen today. God has been very good to Grace College and Seminary.
That is wonderful. And the seminary part for me was wonderful too. I had the opportunity to go through the counseling program, and Dr. Larry Crabb was there, Dr. Dan Allender as well. And my wife actually got to audit a lot of the courses with me and so forth. So it was a really super important time in our life, and set us on a course that radically changed us and set us up to move in the field of counseling in various settings, and for which I'm very, very thankful.
And I'm sure you're experiencing now more than ever coming out of COVID. The area of counseling is on high demand. In fact, I did a recent survey and study of pastors across the country. What is one of the greatest needs that I can help them? And it was a resounding that they need help with mental health for their congregations and for themselves, Mark.
It's not surprising. When people call me up to get into counseling, I regularly hear they can't get in anywhere in our city because the counselors are full, or even maybe can't get on, maybe on a waiting list for 3 to 6 months.
3 to 6 months.
Counselor.
Wow.
It's really tough. And we have a couple universities in town that are constantly sending out training up new therapists, and we still can't keep up.
Wow. There is certainly a need. With that, Mark, I want to dive right into our dialogue and discussion for today. And so, what is PLEDGEtalk?
So PLEDGEtalk is, at its core, it's a 6-step process that I teach and train couples. That's where it came from out of my marriage counseling practice. 6 steps that are, if you follow in a sequence, they will guide you through having conflict, what I call healthy conflict conversations, rather than arguments or fights. Most people, when they have conflict, they still see this a time of argument and or a fight. And honestly, it doesn't have to be that way. You can actually have a sit-down, healthy, and helpful conflict conversation if you follow the 6-step process of PLEDGEtalk.
Could you briefly take us through those 6 steps, Mark?
I can do it briefly. I can do it like in 2 to 3 minutes. I normally take about an hour and a half or longer. But let me do this real quick. And again, it came out of my counseling practice, where I would constantly be watching couples try to talk through a conflict, and they regularly were derailing the conversation. And I just observed what it was they were missing and began to kind of put it in an order and created PLEDGEtalk, which is, again, 6 steps. And the 6 steps are this. starting with the first, PLEDGE is an acronym. And so the first letter stands for the word pause. And I just talk to people about the idea of when you find yourself in a conflict, just stop. Just let me say, one of you just say, can we just pause a minute to let our emotions dial down? I saw a couple again this morning, and they talk about how they'll spend minimum 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, 2 hours, or all day in an argument. And I'm just saying, we're not getting anywhere because the emotions are ramped up, and there are PET scans that show when the emotions are ramped up, the rational part of the brain has shut down. So we literally can't have a healthy conversation when we're upset or frustrated and hurt or angry. So I say, hit the pause button. Hit the pause button to let your emotions dial down, to remember who you are, whether you're husband or wife, parent, child, friends, co-workers, employee, boss. Remember who you are. Okay, who the person is to each other, and then remind yourself also of things like the story in your head about what just happened is not the only story. There's another story that needs to be heard as well. And if you're going to come back to the table to have a healthy conflict conversation, you need to be at a place where you're willing and ready to listen to the other person in their story about what happened. So that's the first step, pause. That leads us into the second step, which is listen, PL, in the word pledge, listen. So you come back to the table to have a conflict conversation, and somebody has to volunteer first. You both can't talk at the same time, although I've seen that done many times, but it doesn't work.
No, it does not.
Somebody has to volunteer to listen first. I would suggest that we have to get to a place where we can volunteer and say, I will do that first. So we raise our hand and say, okay, I'll listen first. You go first. Trent, if you and I were in conflict, I'd say, Trent, tell me what's going on. What happened back then? Why you're frustrated? I will listen. And then I do. I get into a listening mode where I'm going to listen to understand you and what it is you want me to hear. Unfortunately, most of the time, when we set out to listen, we're listening for the wrong thing. We're listening for, like if you and I were concentrating, I'm listening to you, I'd be listening to all the things where I think you're wrong. And therefore, I'm building up my defense. So as soon as you take a breath, I start talking and tell you where you're wrong. Here, there, and there.
You're exactly right. In that, I'm already thinking of my defense, of how I'm right and you're wrong, rather than just listening.
Exactly. And that only fuels the conflict. So I want to listen to hear what, if you're, again, we're in a conflict, I want to hear what you want me to hear, so that I can come away and say, okay, I think I understand. Now I could just stop there and I could say, okay, I get it. I understand. But that would leave you feeling a little bit like, in part, you're glad and excited, but there's a party that still says, I'm not quite sure. How do I know if you understand what I said? So that takes us to the third step, which is to echo back. If I'm going to help you to know for sure that I heard you correctly, and if I know for sure I heard you correctly, I need to echo back and say, I think this is what you're saying. Tell me if I'm right. So I echo back, and I say, did I hear you correctly, or is there anything more or anything else you want me to say? And then if you share some more, I'm going to go back to listening again to understand it even further. And then echo back one more time to make sure, again, I've heard it. Once you say, yes, that's it, you got it, you understand me, almost invariably, we all say, like you would probably be inclined to say, does this make sense, Mark? Do you get it? And that moves us to the fourth step, which is disarm, the fourth letter in the word pledge, P-L-E-D, disarm the tension between us by validating what the other person has said. So I would simply say, Trent, I get it. You're saying this and this and this. I'd be echoing right there. And you'd say, yes, that's what I was thinking about when we had the conflict. And I would say, I can see that. I can appreciate that. That makes sense. You're not crazy for thinking or feeling that way. I can see why you thought that way. Well, what happens then, except you sit back and go, whoa, I think he gets me. Mm-hmm. And the tension between us is gone. We disarm the tension by doing that.
And real communication is taking place.
Real communication and connection is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The fifth step then is the word give. And it's this idea. As I said earlier, when we pause, I have to recognize that maybe I have a story in my head about what went down, and you have a story also, and I need to be willing to listen to your story first, and then echo back, and then disarm by validating. Okay? And I have to do all of that before I give my perspective on what happened, or the story in my head about what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise what happens is you start telling me something and I jump in and say, yeah, but this is what I'm thinking. Then you jump right back and and we're in an argument and everything escalates. But by following pledge, listening first, echoing back and validating, it disarms the tension and it brings you to a place, Trent, where you are actually even willing and maybe even interested in hearing my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until then that I go to the next step that I can give my perspective on what took place with the conflict. So then I give my thoughts. So I would say from my perspective, what happened was this and this and this. And then I might ask you to listen and echo and validate my thoughts or my perspective as well. And that it kind of encompasses then the very last step of what is the word engage. So we engage in a conversation in this manner, back and forth, to really learn and appreciate and validate each other's perspective until we get to the place where the conflict is resolved.
You know, Mark, as you are talking and going through these, I'm thinking of some scenarios in my own personal life that I've accomplished some of these steps, and some areas where I failed miserably, even pastoring. And unfortunately, Mark, sometimes in pastoring, people leave our churches and there's conflict, and sometimes the pastor doesn't handle it well. Sometimes people leaving don't handle it properly. And then we get to the point that, if I see that person in the Walmart store or the grocery store, I'm going to make sure I go to the other aisle so we don't have to talk, right? And it doesn't have to be that way. And I think in looking at these 6 steps, we need to have a goal of what we want as an end result in this relationship. And for some, it may not be that we go out to eat all the time, but it may be that we're cordial whenever we see each other. Yeah. And there's no unforgiveness or bitterness in our heart. Mark, I got to ask you, in looking at all these steps, how'd you develop those? What was kind of the foundation for you that these came about?
Well, as I mentioned, it came out of my practice as a marriage counselor. I've sat literally for thousands of hours watching couples come in, and 4 out of 5 couples, they come in to see me, and within the first minute, they say, we can't communicate. 4 out of 5, that's crazy. So then I say, okay, well, tell me some more. And I watch them, and literally within the first 5 minutes, I'm saying to myself, yep, they can't communicate. She starts saying something and he interrupts, or he rolls his eyes and he's not really listening. Or he attempts to do something and she does the same to him. And I just watched over and over and over again. And it became really painful to watching these couples try to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, I just began to observing and knowing what I do about people and relationships. I just began observing what they're doing. That's, again, derailing the conversation. That's taking them away from ultimately loving the other person well in their communication. And I just kind of, basically marking that all down and kind of taking a record of it. And then I remember one night I came up and talked to my wife. Like I say, I came up because my office, I have a private practice and attached to my home. And I came up and my wife and I were having dinner that night. I said, honey, I think that conflict conversations is something you and I do pretty well. And we began to talk about that, what we do well, what I see in my office all the time. And it was out of those two things that we recognize there's actually a sequence of steps that have to be taken. And those are the steps that we outlined with Pledge. That's ultimately how we came up with it.
One of the courses I teach at times and also oversee is interpersonal communication and conflict resolution and conflict management. And, there's a lot of books out there, some materials. And so, real simply, what makes Pledge Talk different from other trainings on conflict resolution and communication?
So I think there's a couple things. You said in the introduction, as you introducing me, the idea that in most books or trainings on communication, it is all about do's and don'ts. Mm-hmm. Before I wrote my book, I went to Amazon, I looked at 100 books and purchased a number and just read through, looked at it over and over and over again. It's chapter after chapter, book after book about here's the things to do, here's the things not to do. And no one was talking about what do you do when you actually sit down to have the conversation? I mean, eventually I can say, okay, don't do these things, do things, and I can have my list of pros and cons to what we should do and why I think I'm right, you're right. We can do all that, but eventually we're going to sit down and have a conversation. And no one's talking about that conversation itself. We can start in, but as soon as I'm interrupted, what do I do? Just as an example. Mm-hmm. No one's talking about the conversation itself. So what we bring unique to the field of communication and conflict resolution is the understanding that we have to learn about the conversation itself. And that there's actually, if you want to do it well, there really is a process. There's a sequence. It must be done in order, particularly when we're in conflict. And I believe that order is pledged. I don't even believe it's, I didn't one day sit down and just kind of come up with, I'm going to take these 6 steps and, make everybody do them. It really came out of observing what makes conversations go well. I just saw that and put it together and create Pledge Talk out of that.
I love hearing that it wasn't something designed in a test tube and then you threw it out there to see if it worked. You actually saw this and then began to develop it because you saw those problematic issues. I absolutely love that. And I have to ask you, what then is your ultimate goal in teaching Pledge Talk to people?
Well, that's a great question. When I teach and train, whether it's in a church conference setting or even in the training, I did a training for 17 leaders in a company here in town a few months ago. I talk about the idea that even as I teach this, in the context of resolving conflict, my ultimate goal is not to help people to learn how to resolve conflict.
Interesting.
My ultimate goal is to teach people, and I can say this more in a Christian setting more easily, but anywhere you can say this on some level. My ultimate goal is to teach people how to love well in the way they communicate.
Very good.
In the way they communicate. So, Dr. Chapman talks about those 5 languages of love. We can love, show love by serving someone, or by giving affirming words or spending quality time with people. My heart is to teach people how to show that we love each other and that I can love you by communicating in a loving way.
Mm.
And so I'm teaching people how to love well in the way they communicate. And lo and behold, when and as they do that, they will find that even when they have conflict, if they love well in the way they communicate, they'll find they can get their conflict resolved as well.
Well said. Well said. On that note, I've got to.
Well, I was going to say one more thing, Trent.
Sure.
And it's important that I teach and train people that, because oftentimes people can look at pledge and the acronym, the 6 steps, and they come away thinking it's a tool. It's a tool I use whenever I'm in conflict. And so they kind of pull off the shelf and say, okay, I'll do this and this. But unfortunately, what happens is, because our hearts are deceived and desperately wicked, as Jeremiah says, we take something like this and we use it to our own advantage. And we say to our spouse and to our friend, hey, I listened to you, now you need to listen to me. In essence, I did this, I listened, echoed, but now you need to do this for me, kind of thing. Becomes a demanding kind of a practice. And I'm saying that's terrible. That's not at all what I want people to learn to do. I'm teaching you these steps so that you become the best lover you can be of others when you're communicating. It's a heart issue.
For sure. You know, this whole dynamic of loving well in our communication, I think could be applied in a lot of different scenarios. So I'm going to ask you your opinion. What would be the ideal situation where you could teach this?
Yeah. So again, my wife and I were teaching this in marriage conferences in churches and still do. But then I started having people come up to me and say, hey, can I use this with my kids? Mm-hmm. And we would say, of course. Hey, can I use this in the workplace? Well, yes, of course. Can I use this with my friend? Of course. Because they're principles about how to communicate in love and respect, honoring ways. So that kind of began moving us in the direction of teaching and training in various settings. My daughter is a kindergarten teacher, and she started teaching her 5-year-olds in her school. And she would watch 5-year-olds resolve conflict by themselves by learning a very simple version of these steps. So again, teaching in various settings. But my greatest passion is to see or desire would be to see entire organizations or businesses or churches learn the language of love when it comes to communication. So, yeah, I love going and training and teaching with that whole idea in mind.
You know, we're talking about conflict management stemming from relational counseling, marriage counseling, but now we were beginning to uncover that this can be applicable business level, pastoral church level, children. You know, I was having a conversation the other day with someone, and we were talking about communication and the use of sarcasm and how sarcasm can just cause conflict so easily. So I think one of the things I'm learning today from you, Mark, is that the emphasis isn't so much on the conflict resolution as it is communicating with love and godly insight. Is that a pretty accurate summary?
That's really, really good, because I would not want someone to hear this podcast and go away and think, okay, this is a process that I use when or only if I am in conflict. Mm-hmm. I hope they do that and see the benefits of that. But what I would also want them to see or gain from this as they walk away is that these principles or this process is the means by which in every conversation I can make it a far richer and more helpful and healthy and love-filled conversation than had I, if I weren't using this. In fact, I will tell people when I get up and do training, I would say, from this day forward, every single conversation, once you learn this, every single conversation from this day forward has the tremendous potential to being a much more significant conversation, one where love is expressed and connection is created because of using these principles of love. Yeah.
James tells us that words have power, that they have the power of life and death in them, like the rudder of a ship. And so as we're discussing, I'm just thinking about that passage that, the way that we communicate can bring life or it can bring death. And as leaders, we need to be very careful and intentional how we communicate, Mark. It can solve a lot of conflicts. It can eliminate them before they happen, or they can cause unnecessary conflicts. And I think this piece today, can help a lot of ministry leaders and pastors to rethink how they communicate to solve them some unnecessary problems in their churches and ministries.
It's so true. I was doing a Zoom training with 5 men in pastoral training. And one of them emailed me. We did about a 2-hour training, and one of them emailed me like a week later and just was so appreciative of having learned Pledge. Said he's taught it to his family already. His young son is already teaching his friends already. And then he said something really powerful. He said, Mark, before I learned Pledge, he said, whenever conflict we experienced it, I felt myself being powerless because I didn't know what to do. But now, he said, after learning Pledge, I'm seeing myself as an empowered conflict navigator. I thought that was pretty cool.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah. And it will affect his ministry extremely positively throughout the course of his life.
For sure. I'm just reminiscing over a lot of the pastors in my life that I've known, and I think some of the most effective pastors are those that communicated well within this concept of love we're talking about. Mark, you recently wrote a book, and it was highly endorsed by Dr. Larry Crabb. And while we have you here on our Conversations program, tell us a little bit about that book.
It's called The Pledge of a Lifetime. You can get it on Amazon or order it off of my website. But The Pledge of a Lifetime, it worked well. It's as far as the word pledge, because I wrote it when I was mostly doing the marriage counseling, and I wrote it for couples. And I wrote it in the form of a story, a narrative of a couple struggling in their marriage. And they go see a counselor, and he teaches them this process. So as the reader, it's kind of fun. It's almost like you're sitting in the counseling session, kind of like a mouse in the corner, and you're hearing the counselor teach and train and coach them of how to use these practices. And this process. And again, I wrote it in form of a narrative because it's so much easier, I think, particularly for men, to sit down and read a book that's in a story form. So I do everything I can. I really want to help people learn this. And I'm very thankful. I was really blessed by Larry's endorsement. Again, I'm so grateful for our time with him here on Earth before, years ago, and as you might know, Trandy passed away a little over a year ago. But amazing man, and so thankful. And so I was, blessed to write this and to share it with all the couples and training opportunities that we have.
Mark, you've shared with us today a communication of love paradigm that has 6 steps. It's called PLEDGEtalk. And the acronym stands for pause, listen, echo back, disarm, give, and engage. some incredible steps and processes that it's just not a tool, but it's actually a paradigm to communicate in love. And so, Mark, what a phenomenal insight, acronym of a process. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Conversations.
Trent, thank you. I want to tell you, you just did a great echo. You echoed me back very, very well with everything we shared today, and I appreciate it. So you did really well listening.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, Mark, before we go, how can people learn more and contact you?
Sure. Really simple. Go to my website, PLEDGEtalk.com, or email me, mark@PLEDGEtalk.com. And would love to touch base, love to connect, love to talk about any ways that I might be able to help to an organization, your church, come on, do some training and do a conference or a church-wide conference on learning how to love well in communication or with the marriages there. So would love to do that. Thank you, Trent. Pastors,
I encourage you to take advantage of this resource. This resource will also be linked with the Center for Thriving Leaders, and we'll also have this as a repository on the Center for Thriving Leaders YouTube account as well. This has been a great time today. This is Dr. Trent Lambert and the Center for Thriving Leaders with Mark Oelze and Grace Theological Seminary, challenging you to keep thriving in ministry. Thanks for joining us today. See you next time.
This is Dr. Trent Lambert with the Center for Thriving Leaders and Grace Theological Seminary, challenging you to keep thriving in ministry. Thanks for joining us today.